to make that available for future reference. And we strongly encourage questions in the chat thread. There's no such thing as a bad question. There's no career in grant writing, right? Proposal development. So there's absolutely, we see the whole gamut. And so we want to invite you to ask any question. This is a safe place to do that and to feel comfortable doing so. Depending on where we are in the presentation, we might save those questions for the end, or we might be able to answer them on the spot. We'll do our best to do what we can, but we'll be sure to answer all your questions. And we just encourage your participation and your engagement and being present with us. So we realize with virtual, there's other things going on, but to the extent you can be with us for this hour and a half together, I think you'll get a lot out of it. And are there any questions before we start? I'll turn to the chat, or feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions specific about what I've just shared so far. Okay, we will get started. I will begin by formally introducing myself, and I have decades of experience in the grant writing world. I had formerly been an accountant where everything lines up so neatly, 1 + 1 = 2. And I don't know why, but something drew me to the puzzling aspect of grant making and grant writing, and really community is largely what brought me in from a lot of volunteering. So I wanted to find a way to put my systems and process mind into this piece of the work, the grant writing and the fundraising, if you will. And to answer that question, how many proposals have I ever received formal training? No, just hard knocks, right? And of course, I've attended a lot of seminars and conferences, but most of it has been just learning just the way you're all learning now. And how many proposals have I written? I think it would be under 10, so not a lot. How many proposals have I reviewed, scored, analyzed, discussed, brought forward to boards? Easily a couple hundred, few hundred, a lot over that time. So we won't count that, but I'm going to turn over to our lead host, Danielle Baer, who is why we brought Danielle in, because she brings so much experience. And so I'll let Danielle introduce herself, and then we'll kick it off from there.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's great to virtually see you and connect with you. My name, as Leslie said, is Danielle Baer, and I currently work as a consultant supporting organizations with grant writing and some other fund development strategy, communications, some project management. I tend to work with a lot of smaller organizations, which from my understanding may be the majority in this group, who may not have development staff and most likely don't have a dedicated grant writer. So look to me as a contracted outside support to help them with their grant management and grant writing. And in terms of how many grants I've written, my background's in social work, and I kind of fell into grant writing, as many people do, and sort of end up as the development director or development staff in a nonprofit. And in the 20 years, countless grants. Currently, I probably write about 8 to 10 grants a month with the various clients that I work with. So see a lot of different funders out there, a lot of processes. So I'm hoping to share some of that knowledge with you here today. So I will pass it back to Leslie.
Thank you, Danielle. I love that. The number of grants you've written in a month. I've written, maybe in my lifetime, I don't know. Or maybe I've forgotten some, they were so hard. So it's great that you're here. We'll tell you just a little bit about Verdant. Most of you are probably familiar with Verdant. We'd love to hear too how you heard about this workshop. Feel free to pop that in the chat. It's always good for us to know how the word gets out. A little bit about Verdant is that we are a program of the Public Hospital District. Number 2, we go by the name Verdant Health Commission, and we are governed by a board of commissioners who are elected. And we have board meetings every month that are public. You're welcome to sit in and learn about that. Our next board meeting is this Wednesday. The focus will be on mental health. That's an opportunity for just our commissioners to learn about mental health in our region. And we have a staff of 11, a mix of part-time and full-time, and lean machine that's running all the great events that are happening at our facilities that are public and accessible to anyone to use for meetings that they have for their organization. And I do want to highlight that our priority areas for 2023 and 2024 are in these three specific issue areas for the region. Is addressing mental health, healthcare access, and food security. And we do have a open RFP, request for proposal, or funding opportunity, if you will. Beginning May 1 is when the grant portal will open up. Many of you may know that. We have 2 cycles a year, and so that grant portal will be open. Any nonprofit organization can register on that portal. It's all on our website under funding opportunities, and it'll be open until June 16th when those proposals are due. I saw there was a question here about wanting to learn more about that process, and we will have tomorrow, I think at 1 o'clock, it's on our website, we'll be having a Q&A information session for anyone that has questions. We offered one last week. This will be the same session, same content, just different day, different channel. So we'll be doing that. Answer any questions before that grant application begins. And that's a little bit about Verdant. So moving on, I will share briefly at a high level our agenda. We plan to give you kind of a bird's eye view of a funder's landscape. So some of this will be familiar to folks, but just to remind us on what that looks like in your universe as you're thinking about applying for grants and where to go for that. We'll have just a brief introduction to the core elements first initially about what's necessary in a proposal, what you'll commonly see across all proposals, 5 or 6 elements there. And then we'll just step back and really think about the why we're doing this, why you're here, why your organization is doing the important critical work you're doing every day. And then we'll go deeper into the core elements and learn more about grant writing, what you signed up for. And our learning goals today are pretty straightforward. We want to provide you an opportunity to gain an understanding of that funder landscape and how to identify the opportunities that are right for your organization. So that's really key. We want to be able to help you acquire skills to determine, if you're eligible for a grant, to submit a grant proposal, and how would you plan for and write those elements? How do you prepare best for that? We have some good tips that Danielle will be sharing that's been really helpful in her process. And then we'll explore how to develop strong messaging for your organization and that communicates that why of your work and impact. So to a sense of our goals, and if you have any questions, again, I encourage you to include those in the chat section, and then I will turn it over to Danielle to bring us into that funder's landscape.
Great, thank you. It's really helpful to see the range of experience that everybody has. And I know several of you, it looks like some of you are new to grant writing. Some have been doing this for quite a while. So we have experts in the room, and there'll be a few points throughout the presentation where we'd love to hear your input, your thoughts, ideas. And then, of course, questions. We can all learn from each other. I'm learning all the time about grant writing because it is an evolving field. Funders are changing how they want you to talk about your work, the process that they use for you to access funding. So things are evolving, changing. It's very nuanced. So this is, some fun kind of foundational knowledge and skills and information. And hopefully we can all learn together through this. And we did want to start with a little bit about the funder landscape. I know a challenge for a lot of organizations is identifying those funding opportunities and knowing where to look. And to give you a brief overview of different types of funders, we have our public funders. So that would be federal, state, municipal, local, city or county. And public funding opportunities are, often ones that organizations are interested in accessing, but there are some challenges, especially for smaller organizations, around kind of the requirements that go with some of those public funding opportunities and what having the internal capacity to manage some of those funds. So that's kind of one bucket as the public funding. Private funding, so foundations, family foundations, other independent foundations. So we have a lot of private foundations in our region. Community foundations, again, we have locally, the Seattle Foundation. I believe there's a community foundation of Snohomish County. So the community foundation is usually regional, and a lot of times will have donor advised funds. So individuals who kind of turn to the community foundation to help them with their giving. Corporate giving, corporations are, I don't know the exact rules or regulations, but are required to have sort of a community impact or some portion of their funding that goes out into the community. And then there's Rotary clubs or those types of community organizations as well that give out grants. And then individuals, that is a very large source of revenue for many organizations. And whether it's through major donors or other individual giving campaigns, or bequests, which is where individuals can include in their will either funds or property or different ways to support an organization. So that's kind of a high-level overview of types of funders. And an interesting data point, I think, especially for smaller organizations, it can feel, easier to go for the grants, but something that's interesting to know that individuals are actually the largest portion of giving in this country. So 67% of donations or contributions are from individuals. And then you'll see 19% by foundations, 9% bequest, and 4% corporations. So this slide, it's something to think about as you're thinking broader, kind of high level, how to support your organization, the idea of diversifying funding and not sort of counting on one source. But if you're all grant funded, is there a way to think about how to build out more support through individuals? So interesting data point there. And this is from Giving USA, so you can go to their website if you want to learn more about that.
Yeah, I wonder if this surprises some folks. It might. It definitely surprised me when I first saw it. So
yeah, me too. So moving into kind of how to find those opportunities. So prospect and grant research is a necessary part of kind of that big picture of grant management. And I know for many organizations, I don't know if we do like a quick hand, but how many of you, how many of you are challenged with kind of finding that capacity to do the research? I'm guessing everyone will raise their hand, but yeah, assuming that many of you are smaller organizations that don't necessarily have a development team or dedicated development staff, it can be hard to do this prospect research, but it's such an important part of the whole sort of grant management, grant writing process. And these are some reasons why it is very important. I think that second point there, about 1/3 of applications are successful. If you have if you build a pipeline of potential funders, then you can start, applying to those 3 to 4 funders a month, and knowing that only about 1 in 3 will come in, you can sort of build out that plan of how you're going to reach your fundraising goal. And there's tools like a grants calendar, or, there's so many different ways out there that you can build out that grant management system. But the idea is to have a calendar where you're starting to plot out for the year, when are these different grants due? Are some of them rolling submissions? And we know May is a quiet month, so we can try to submit those in that month and start to think through a plan. And doing that research on finding those opportunities is a really important piece of that. So we do have a few ideas here of how to identify prospects and grant opportunities. The first set are free, because I know that's always appealing when you don't have to pay money for it. So GuideStar, which is part of Candid, which is an online resource that also houses one of the funder databases called Foundation Directory. And they also have a lot of, I think they're mostly all free webinars and different resources on fundraising, case statements, all different sorts of aspects related to fund development and communications. And GuideStar, one part of Candid, they have a free service where you can receive a certain number of, or do a certain number of searches per month of foundations. And through those search, you can find information about the foundation. And some foundations may not have a lot of information, but usually will have their 990 form linked. And through the 990 form, you're able to look up who they have funded, who received grants from them and how much they awarded. So it's kind of a research tool if you're trying to get an idea of a foundation, what types of organizations are they funding? Do they fund organizations in your region? What's the size of their grant award? So it's a tool to find that information. And there's one section of the 990 that provides that. And Candid actually has some good articles and information about how to navigate a 990 form. And then you can look at other similar organizations to yours, their annual reports, do they list who their funders are? And that's a way to get some ideas. And I think, sometimes in the nonprofit world, we have that scarcity mindset or competitive mindset, but so many funders out there, they're looking for organizations to partner with and to invest in, and they may not know about you. And by looking at another similar organization, it's a way of seeing, oh, this funder, funded our partner here, maybe they'd like to fund us too. And then also signing up for email notices from government agencies, like I know the Department of Commerce, Washington State, they have a great, a pretty transparent, frequent emails when all their different grant opportunities are open. And the Washington Fund Directory is actually a new resource to me. I'm not sure how long it's been around, but you can go to their website and they organize funding opportunities by topic area, and you can click on that. And it's all, I think it's all public funding. So you can then link to the website of that specific funding opportunity. So if you Google Washington Fund Directory, you'll be able to access that. And then we also have some paid funder databases. The first two listed there, those are very expensive, but if you had a collaborative and you wanted to share the cost, that could be a way to subscribe to that, or GrantStation or GrantWatch are less expensive. And one strategy is to even just subscribe for, let's say, a month or two and do some intensive, research and download an Excel document with, you can download a spreadsheet of all the foundations that you've discovered through that process, and then do research on your own and end the subscription. So you don't have to think about it as an ongoing expense, but it could be kind of a one-time thing. So then once you find the potential funders, there's that question, is this a good fit, or is what you're doing aligned to the funding opportunity? And there is a variety of questions to think about and consider. First off, what is the application process? So is it a very cumbersome process? Is the amount that they fund worth how much time and effort it will take to do the application? So I think, taking time to consider that and not just jump right into it, looking at what they fund, making sure that their funding priorities match with what you do. What is their timeline? Some funders take, 6 to 9 months to make a decision. Some might just be 60 days. If you're applying for a time-sensitive project, making sure that their timeline matches with when you need the funding. Who is behind the money? So some organizations, there may be, a values question. Is the funder, for example, some big corporations or different types of entities, if what they do, or, if there's issues around, labor disputes or different things, is that okay for your organization to accept their money? Is that something that you need to discuss? What impacts does the funder want to see? So I touched on this a little bit in talking about public funding, but if the funder wants to see you, serving a certain number of people or reaching certain outcomes and deliverables, are those things that your organization is able to deliver on, and doing a little pre-work before actually applying. And then again, this is a little repetitive, but what are their requirements? So is the reporting feasible for your organization? There's one application I worked on recently with a client, and after the fact, we realized it's one we don't want to do again. They got the award, but it requires 3 reports over the course of the year for a pretty small amount of money. So it's just one of those, sometimes you learn from the experience. who is eligible to apply. So if you're fiscally sponsored, for example, making sure that they support fiscally sponsored organizations.
And I just want to add too that there's this term, maybe some of you have heard of it, called net grant. And it's just an expression about, thinking about how much resources, time, cost go into your end of it to invest in an application, and then how much you'll get out of that. So if it's a $10,000 grant and you're spending weeks and weeks of time and talking through it and just a lot of work that's taking away from other things, you have to weigh out, is that worth, is that going to end up being a net positive for us, a net win? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And once you are ready to apply, again, this is in an ideal world if you have the time to plan and prepare, which hopefully the more you do grant writing, the more you build out the systems internally, you can take the time to have that planning period. But some questions to consider, as I've mentioned this, so it's a bit repetitive, but do you have the capacity to prepare and submit the proposal? So what else is happening in your organization right now? Are you, about to launch a program and staff are pulled in a million different directions? And, if this is a $100,000 grant, maybe it is worth the time to figure out how to build that capacity. If it's a small $5,000 grant, maybe you let it go and put it on your calendar for next year. So thinking about capacity internally. And, if it does feel like the right fit and you want to get going with it, these are some tips to help you with that process. So you could create a grant proposal checklist and timeline to kind of help you plan out the different steps that need to happen. And then determining how much you want to ask for, what's allowable and what makes sense. I think sometimes this is where research can be helpful. If the majority of grants by a funder are in the $25,000 range, then you don't want to ask for 50, and just kind of thinking about what's the right fit. And for a new project, is it feasible? You can use some planning tools like logic models or different ways to think through the different pieces before jumping into the grant proposal. And then thinking about which staff need to be involved. Often a finance staff person is someone that you need to bring in to help with developing the budget, or if they ask for a balance sheet or a profit and loss or different financial pieces, you'll want to involve your financial staff. And lastly, in the final box here, this is really key. If the funder lists a contact or says they're open and encourage a conversation before applying, I highly encourage you to take advantage of that. I think, I know I felt this in my, when I first started doing development work, it can feel intimidating or a little scary to reach out to a funder, or they can seem like, they're a peer and or the power dynamic can be really challenging, but especially when there are more and more funders that say we're open to talking to you, or they list their contact information. And the worst thing that can happen is they won't respond to you. So I think it's always, and my experience is that the majority do respond, and they do provide some level of guidance around whether they think you're a good fit. So I highly encourage you to do that.
And Danielle, I would just mention too that, and again, feel free to pop questions in that we can get to later as well, or we can throughout. But I would also mention that I see more community organizations involving their community in some ways as they develop the proposal. So it might be like a task force, or it might be, to the extent that makes sense, or just to find out, what services people are needing, or to consider that. So more and more, I'm seeing more and more folks do that. So,
yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, and this last slide here is an example of what this could look like. So week 1, preparation and planning. So some of those things we talked about, who needs to be involved. So that could be a place to bring in community and get their input around priorities, or how they'd like to see the project play out. And then weeks 1 to 3, developing the narrative. So this is if you have a month, and I know sometimes that's not the case, but ideally. So setting aside time to draft a narrative and get feedback from some of those key staff and partners. And then at the same time, starting to collect those supporting materials and trying not to, save that to last minute, because sometimes, especially some of the financials, can take a little while to pull together. And then, and also, meeting I know we all get frustrated with those word and character count. So doing the finessing to start to work on that. And then ideally submitting the proposal a day before, as so many systems now have become online, and just to avoid any glitches. And sometimes if it's a big competitive process, the system gets overwhelmed and issues happen. So if you can do it the day before, that's ideal.
Like, where's my password? All of that.
Yeah.
I think there's one more thing I wanted to add, because so many are online. I encourage you to, see if you can get the questions in a PDF or in some format, so that your team can be working on them offline. So sometimes it's just so hard to work in a portal as a team. Mm-hmm. So I'd encourage you to, use a Word doc or a Google Doc or whatever works in your system, but something that can be for collaborative sharing for those of you that are, have more than one person that might be helping you with this.
Yeah, that's a great. And more funders are also making their application available as a Word document or a PDF, so you can download that and then work on it offline. So that's a great suggestion. All right. So moving into the core elements of a grant. So the grant writing part. So now you've found your potential prospects, and it's time to sit down and write that grant.
If you have questions about the funders landscape, feel free to drop them in, and if that was helpful, let us know. So moving on.
Yeah. All right, so core elements of a grant proposal. So for many of you, this will look very familiar. These are kind of the big buckets of areas that most grant applications will ask for. So usually they'll want some kind of a needs statement. So they want to know, this is kind of the why, which we're going to explore more in just a minute, but why is the issue you're working on important? Why does it matter to your community? Why is your organization needed? So looking at those pieces, and then moving into describing, what you do. So this is really the what do you do? How do you do it? What are your goals and outcomes? And, how are you going to demonstrate how you're going to achieve those outcomes? So what's the evaluation plan? So that's really a big, that's a big piece of a grant application. A lot of funders want some kind of a timeline. So what are the big milestones? Approximately when are they going to happen? And then they'll want to potentially know what's your organization's capacity. So who are the staff that are going to be implementing the program? What qualifies them to be able to do that? They may ask some other capacity questions about your organization, like what's your history of, or what are past accomplishments, or that kind of thing. The budget. So most funders, if you're requesting project funding, they'll want a specific project budget. And along with that, they'll probably want a narrative. So describing what are the different expenses, justifying the different costs in your budget. What are the other sources of income that will help you meet your goal? And then, how are you going to sustain your project? And then some may also want an operating budget as well for your full organization. And then all these supporting documents, so financials, the board list, other funding sources, and those sorts of things. So we, at this point, we wanted to do a poll to get a sense of what the most challenging areas of grant writing are for you. So we're doing a little experiment here with polling. So I think, let's see here.
Zoom, there you go.
Yeah, so you should have a poll pop up. If you can choose which area is the most challenging for you. Let's see, looks like about half. So maybe another 20 seconds. All right, it looks like almost everyone has answered. Maybe we should just go ahead and end the poll for now and see.
Did you get good responses? Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. It looks like,
budget.
Are you able to see the results of the poll?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah,
so wow. Or no? Are others able to see the results? I don't know. Yeah, I can see that. Yes.
Okay.
All right. So we'll come back to that, and we'll be able to hone in on some of these areas.
Yeah.
But it looks like budget needs statement and evaluation plan are the strongest right now. Who doesn't love a budget? Come on, really? Oh my goodness. And don't you love how funders ask them all so differently with all different templates and all different requirements? Oh my goodness. Okay, great. Thank you, Danielle. I'm going to take it from here for this next section. The understanding the why. This piece to me is so essential. It is the glue, the backbone that holds all these elements together. So we just wanted to dedicate a little bit of time to, it seems obvious or intuitive to most of us, like, I know why I'm doing this, but it's really important to either go back to your board or bring your staff together at a meeting and be somewhat reflective and just check in now and then that you understand the why. And for many folks, since after the pandemic, this why might have adjusted or pivoted a little bit or changed. And so it's really important to be in touch with that. I want to be able to share this message with you from Simon Sinek. He is an inspirational leader. He describes himself as an enthusiastic optimist. He works a lot with causes and organizations to help people figure out how best to work with communities and help others. So I'm going to share this, and I will do this magically. Let's give it a try. New screen share, right? And thank you for being patient with me for 1 second. Let's see, stop share. Do I do that? Okay, stop share. And then I will do a new screen share for us. There we go. All right. And found it. There we go. Sure. And oops, I don't think I did the sound. Let me go back 1 second. Stop share. I can do something magical with the sound. We did practice this, really. Share screen. And then, oh yeah, I've got the sound. Here we go. All right, we're good. How many times does the sound not come up sometimes? It's going to have a few seconds of a, ad as typically, so.
Allowance pro tip. Tell your parents to save money on wireless and give you a raise.
I'll get to
switch to Xfinity Mobile and save 50% over AT&T. Get the best
all
price
right.
for 2
we'll
lines of
hear
unlimited,
about
just
3 minutes
$30 a line per month.
You get a sense. This was a TED Talk in the sound area. Everybody hear it okay? Thumbs up? Okay.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all of the assumptions? For example, why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight, and the Wright brothers beat them to it? There's something else at play here. About 3.5 years ago, I made a discovery. And this discovery profoundly changed my view on how I thought the world worked, and it even profoundly changed the way in which I operate in it. As it turns out, There's a pattern. As it turns out, all the great and inspiring leaders and organizations in the world, whether it's Apple or Martin Luther King or the Wright brothers, they all think, act, and communicate the exact same way. And it's the complete opposite to everyone else. All I did was codify it. And it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand.
Oh, Leslie, you're muted still.
Great, there we go. Does that work? All right. And I'll bring us back to our presentation. Folks able to see that? Okay, fantastic. So I just like this message. It's a good reminder that if we think about, and I know it seems obvious to many, but really remembering, and especially when you, either if there's, staff turnover or you have new board members, or that we all kind of bring ourselves back to the why. And this will show in your application. This will show in your proposal. So if it's not connected, if your activities and your request and your budget, if your outcomes, if they're not connected to the funder's understanding of your why, if you've not articulated that well, it will come through in the proposal. Someone asked a question, we'd like to know from funders about some gaps in applications. What is it that keeps them from getting approved? And sometimes, there's many reasons for that, but sometimes it's because there is not this deeper understanding of so why are they doing this again? Or why do they have that outcome on tutoring when actually they're working, with, this, healthcare, or, it's just, sometimes it doesn't connect. That's too obvious of an example, but there are instances where, many times where it's just not lining up. So I don't want to drive that home anymore, but that is the point, that to be thinking about that message, and understanding the why will help answer, these questions. How does this project help people? This is what funders are asking. So who are they helping? Really understand the population that you're working with. What vital services are you offering? What are your plans on the second row here? What are your plans for the future? To get some understanding of the direction of where you're going can be really helpful. And how are you, you've mentioned you've got your needs statement that's strong. And so tell the story about what you're doing now that will lead you to a future state, understand what that looks like. And then how will our funds be most beneficial to helping you, connecting the vision to the work and the budget? And then why is it that you should have the support? So prove that you're making a difference. How are your services different than what others are providing, or how are they complementary to what others are doing? So by no means are we suggesting that you compete with other organizations that are doing similar work, but how are you working together? Maybe you've worked together and have identified some gaps, and organization A will work with gaps 1, 2, and 3, and you'll work with gaps 4, 5, and 6. So how are you coordinating? And then ending that with a real clear call to action in everything you do that ties to it. So I think that's important as we move to our now our deeper dive, and it really helps. Thank you for those taking the poll to understand the areas that we want to prioritize too in our conversation. So I will take a moment to see if there's any particular. I do recommend. I think there's some great other inspirational and good leadership ideas and conversations that you'll see from that site. And I'll pass it on to Danielle. So great.
All right, great, thank you. So diving in now to core elements, and it's great to get grounded in that, that thinking and exploration around the why, because as Leslie said, that is so critical in the grant writing process, because at the end of the day, I think more and more with funders, you know, it's not about the grammar or about the writing style. It's really about understanding why are you doing what you're doing? What is the gap that you're filling? And then how are you doing it? And why should they partner with you? So looking at kind of that first area, need statement, which did, it was one of the areas that people shared some challenges with. So this is really where you get to the why. So it's the opportunity to share what the need is in your community for the services that you provide. And I think more and more, you know, this used to be a very written or talked about when you talked about needs in more of a deficit-based way. And I think more and more there's an understanding and a desire to look at it from more of a strengths or assets-based approach. So not necessarily needing to say, you know, not making it about individuals or communities. These are all the problems that are happening with them, but looking at, you know, what are some of the systemic barriers that communities are experiencing that are perpetuating racism and poverty and other barriers. So, you know, I think there's a greater understanding, and it's an opportunity to, when you're answering the why, to make it about some of those bigger systemic issues that are happening. And I think also you want to bring it down to the personal level. So including quotes or stories from communities can be really powerful. And I know it's challenging when there's a limited character count or word count. A lot of times people will ask, you know, well, how do I fit in that story when I can only write 250 words? But maybe it's starting the section with a short quote that just illustrates, it brings in the voice of the people that you're serving and the communities that you're supporting. And there doesn't need to be a big explanation around the quote. You can just have a short quote and say, you know, this was a family supported through our services, and then kind of go into some of the other pieces. And incorporating data is always important in the community, in the needs statement, whether from your own work. So if you have data around needs or impact from your work, or other research or data sources like I know we're not, Snohomish County, I keep defaulting to King County, but you know, there might be data from local government sources. I work a lot in the education field, and OSPI, their report card for each district and at the school level provides great data around academic achievement broken down by different demographic groups. So there's, you know, a lot of resources out there to pull from. And, you know, some of the questions you might see for this section: what are current challenges faced by the populations or communities your organization supports, and how is your organization responsive to the communities you seek to support? Are there any, since this was an area where people shared that they do face some challenges, are there any specific questions anyone would like to ask about this area of grant writing? Let's see, otherwise I can keep, I'm just looking in chat here, or if people who have a lot of grant writing experience, as several of you, it sounds like you do, if you have any thoughts you want to share in the chat about the needs statement.
Yeah, has anyone received feedback that, you know, that was a really compelling needs statement, that was great, and so that you could share with us what funders liked about that, or be great if you have an example. I do find it helps to have some independent data, not too much. It's a very fine balance, but just something that gives that balance of heart and passion that your organization and your leadership has, but also to give it some credibility, if you will, that the community really needs this and that this is important work.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Okay, we can keep moving along.
Okay. One question.
Oh, there was a question.
Yeah. How to get funding for a privileged group?
How to get funding for a privileged group, like STEM student group. I understand how to get funding for a privileged group. So I guess it goes back to that why question. So you need to ask why there is a need for this, and then demonstrating that why and what the purpose is. So it may be a privileged group, but it may be, depending on what your funding is for, it may not be for, it's hard to say what that might be, but to understand what that need is and why you're needing support be important.
The other piece I'd add, which I didn't touch on as much in the earlier section, but so much is about relationships. And so finding, funders who are interested in whatever, if you're providing STEM programming, finding those funders that you can build a relationship with, share what you're doing, the why, and even if, because I think funders, just like with individual giving and all aspects of fundraising, so much of it is about building the relationship and finding that match of what you do and what their funding interests are. So in terms of organization project description and the what, it looks like this area people feel pretty good about, which makes sense because this is where you get to talk about what you do. And I think this is what we all know so well because you're in it and doing it every day. And, some questions you might see: how does your organization address the need? What services do you provide? Who do you serve? What's your proposed project? Some funders want to know a little bit about your past track record. So what kinds of accomplishments or outcomes you might be able to share? How do you stand out? So this is something I know can be challenging sometimes to write about, is kind of what makes you, what you do unique. How are you different than other organizations? Personally, I don't love this question because I feel like it's, I'd rather kind of focus on what we're doing versus compared to other organizations, but it's something, there's ways to write about it. You can talk about partners that you have and what's the unique role that you play in the partnership or something like that. Well, not question, who do you collaborate or partner with? So those are some of the questions you might see.
I think what could be helpful here too is when you do draft something, share it with someone completely unfamiliar with your organization. So hand it over to a cousin or someone down the street, a neighbor, and ask them to then read back, to share back with you, convey back to you. So what did you learn about my organization? And see what they say. And if you feel like they're not picking up the salient points, or if they're not, or if they're, missing it, then that's great. Then try it again, iterate. But having this one down will be so important. And then you can use that for lots of your proposals, right? So this is a key one that you really want to have. It needs to be, tight and clear, and getting all the essential elements about your organization or project. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think it can be easy to maybe go to provide too much information. So you don't want to get too far into the weeds and the details of what you do.
Right.
So that section that's really kind of high level, bullet points, what do you do? Who do you reach? And not using acronyms, not using jargon, because I think that's where you're doing it so much that you can easily make the assumption or forget that the reader probably knows absolutely nothing about what you're doing, or very little, maybe in a completely different field. They may be in, banking or a lawyer, or, you don't know kind of the backgrounds of the foundation staff and the trustees. So making that assumption, they won't know anything.
Yeah. And then it also reminds me of resumes. Like when you look at resumes, you'll have a couple of minutes. And so reading that project description or organization description, you figure you want their eyes to stay on it and not move on. So how to just, again, get the key points across. So, okay.
Yeah.
Moving on to,
Yes.
yeah.
So a lot of funders now ask a question or several questions about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this is something I've seen more and more probably in the past 5 years or so. And so the questions may look different. It could be, asking about how you incorporate racial equity and or social justice into your work or program, how you deliver your programming or services using culturally and linguistically responsive or matched approaches, and how do you address cultural differences when working with youth and families that may come from a different background than your staff. Some funders either will ask, how do your staff and board reflect the communities you serve, or they may ask you to actually fill out a chart with percentages or numbers of staff and board and within different demographic groups or lived experiences. Some are interested in your understanding around systemic inequities and might ask about how you're addressing the root causes of inequities. And then, there might be a question around who you collaborate and partner with. They may want to understand that within the context of if you're serving, the population that you're serving, and how are your partners also representative, or how do you collaborate around equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I think, for some organizations, if you're not used to responding to this question, it's good to think about and brainstorm how you would want to talk about this work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
So moving into goals, objectives, and outcomes, this can get tricky, I know, for many people to kind of separate what is a goal, what is an objective, and what is an outcome. And sometimes goals and objectives can be interchangeable, or, it's
and outputs are in there, right?
Right,
yeah.
Outputs, right. When you're writing a grant, it's not a PhD, or you're not writing your doctorate, but it doesn't need to be one of those things where you don't want to spend too much time kind of deliberating over whether it's a goal or an objective. But and like I said, sometimes funders will ask for a goal, sometimes they'll ask for an objective, but this is kind of an idea of how they're differentiated. So a goal, you're kind of thinking big picture. So what's kind of the big picture vision of what you're trying to do? Objectives would generally, those specify the end product of a project or program. So you want those to be more measurable, maybe using numbers, using kind of more timely and specific what you're trying to get to. And then the outcomes, that's the expected change that you're anticipating. So outputs would be more the numbers that you're trying to get to, and the outcome would be like a change. Well, we'll get into, there's a slide with more detail, but more the change that you're anticipating. So sometimes this is rolled into the question on your organization or program. And as part of that, they'll ask you to talk about the goals and objectives. Sometimes it's a standalone question. So it could be describe what you hope to achieve and how you'll know if you're succeeding. And sometimes it's very specific, provide a project description, including goals, impact to the community, and how you'll measure success.
And sometimes it's in a chart format. And so it's good to sort of whiteboard this or sketch it out somewhere with your team too. And especially if it's let's say it's an executive director writing this, so important to bring in the individual responsible for implementing the program and carrying it out to be sure that this is realistic and achievable for them. Too often it happens that you've got one person writing the proposal that in theory, this is how it should all work. We're going to change the world. And then the person carrying it out might say, well, one step at a time. So this is our first goal this year. So make sure that you're working together. So this one can take a little bit of time to work on. And it could, it'll vary project to project, and also depends on the grant term and what's realistic of what you can achieve and what you can measure. So that brings us to the next. Here we go. Yeah.
So the goals, as I mentioned earlier, it's sort of that big vision. What's the idealized dream of what you hope to accomplish? And, what are the wishes for the community you're working with? And it should be concise, so no more than a sentence. And a funder should be able to look at your goal statement and have a clear understanding of what your organization or program is about. And I have some example words that you could use for goals: improve, promote, strengthen, advocate, empower. So what's that kind of big vision of what you're trying to do? Objectives, as I mentioned earlier, those are more specific and measurable. So that's specifying the end product of a project and should show what's expected and measurable in concrete terms. Again, brief, no more than 1 or 2 sentences. And if you have multiple objectives, always putting what's the most important for your organization first. And noting that you don't want to confuse objectives, so the what and when, with your methods, which is the how are you going to be showing that you're reaching your objectives. And some good words for objective language, you want to use action words like assess, build, coordinate, increase, decrease, establish, design. So this is where, and I have some example objectives in a slide, but for example, increase the percentage of clients who are able to access our services, or that's very broad, but that's where you want kind of a number, like increased by a certain percentage or that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think too, also to keep in mind, what we're seeing as a funder in reports is sometimes it's hard to tell if it's like duplicated clients, duplicated numbers, or unduplicated. And so, not to get technical, but it's helpful if, let's say it's, a food bank, you may not know, who's new and coming that week. So then, we just assume that the point is that you're able to deliver X percentage of, to people that you're serving. But sometimes it might be unique clients or individuals that you're working with for a workshop. And so it might be, we're going to host 5 workshops and we hope that, we get, 50 new people this year to attend. So sometimes that clarity could be helpful. But again, this one takes a little bit of time to work through. So I would count on that. Yeah.
Yeah. On one of the resources, I believe one that we'll be providing, it's a project planning template. So it just kind of walks you through the different things to think about, like who are you, who's the target population that you're serving? What's your goal? So some of those things to kind of help you think through the different pieces, not just project planning, but then translating that into a grant application. So then the outcome piece, usually this is in a separate question around how you're going to measure your impact and what are the outcomes you're hoping to achieve. So usually goals and objectives are kind of one area, and then this is more a question around impact and measuring results. And so the outcomes are the benefits, changes, or effects that occur to the population or systems due to the project or organization's efforts. So funders will often ask for those outcomes, and they want to know what's the change in behaviors, skills, or knowledge. So, certain percentage of clients will know how to access a certain resource, or a certain, percentage of students will increase their, I'm not thinking of an example. I'll show you an example in a second, but anyways, those are some of the things you want to demonstrate through outcomes. And the evaluation plan is how you set up the methods that you plan to measure the outcomes. So that could be surveys, it could be some kind of an assessment. And it's really important to set up those systems early to collect data over the course of the funding period, so that when, let's say, all of a sudden it's been a year, you have a report due, and you realize, wait, we didn't do the pre-survey or you need to kind of have those systems in place. And this is part of your capacity building within your organization to kind of manage the different components of a grant. And, grant writing, there's the actual writing of the grant, but it's really kind of this bigger process of, like we talked about, finding opportunities, actual grant writing, and then reporting on the grant at the end of the funding period. Sharing your past outcome data in the grant application, that's also a great way to demonstrate what you're able to do, that you've been able to implement an evaluation plan and analyze the data and be able to pull results. So that's a great way to show a funder, we've done this, we know what we're doing, and here's what we plan to do for this new opportunity. And this is a little bit more about the evaluation plan. And again, it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be complex. I think sometimes when we hear the word evaluation, it sounds overwhelming and feels like, you know, a big thing that you have to undertake, but it can be simple. You can collect quantitative data, which can either be counted or compared. So it's more numeric data. So number of people served. If you're doing a pre and post survey, you know, what's the change in knowledge or skills or that kind of thing. Qualitative data is great, you know, stories, testimonials, what's the impact of your program from kind of what your clients are telling you. So I think it's really important to build in ways to collect that information. I think it sometimes gets missed, or you just, you know, don't think about how to do that, but it's just, if you can somehow build that into your program, it can be really, really great to have that. And in the evaluation plan, you'll want to figure out how you're going to collect the information, who will collect it, and who will analyze the information and report the results. So yeah, those are some of the different pieces to think about. And here's an example of goals, objectives, and outcomes. And this is from a STEM education program. So the goal is kind of that big vision: build a pipeline to STEM careers for young people from historically underrepresented communities. So that's kind of big picture. What is this organization trying to do? So the objectives are more specific and measurable. So the first one, establish a mentor relationship for each of the 30 program participants to meet monthly, either in person or virtually, to support their career exploration. So so it's measurable. You're saying how many people, it's timely. You're kind of saying how often it's going to happen. And it's pretty specific, you know, what you're going to do, how many people. The second one, increase awareness of career opportunities in tech industries for youth of color and low-income youth through field trips and panel presentations. And then the outcomes here. So with those two objectives, they are measurable. There's a way to, you know, measure over the course of the funding period whether or not the objective was achieved. The outcomes, so now that you're proposing, is that 80% of youth express interest and see a pathway to a career in tech, and 90% of youth are matched with a mentor and meet on a monthly basis. So these are projected outcomes that you're expecting from the program. And and then measured by the evaluation plan would be a pre and post survey asking questions about skills and knowledge gained in the program, and then data collected on the mentor program. So number of mentors, number of young people served and matched with a mentor. So that's kind of an example of what that can look like. Kind of big picture, specific, measurable. What are the changes in skills, behavior, and how are you going to measure that?
And I should add that sometimes the data can be collected in a most, hopefully non-intrusive way. So it could be where, it might just be 3 questions. So they come into a clinic and, we've all seen it, like when you go to wash your hands, or use the restroom at the airport, it'll ask you a smiley face, or how was your experience? And so it could be a piece of paper and you have, 3 different ratings or 5 ratings, and they just kind of give a tear on, which one is like on the 5 or on the 1, or they could circle it, but you can get some very basic baseline just to give you an early, be able to give you a measure. There's really creative ways to do that. And I'll move to the next slide, but we can talk about some of the ways that you can measure impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find this is a challenging area for a lot of organizations. So it'd be great to hear in the chat, or if you want to come off of mute and share ways that have worked well for your program or organization.
Love to hear from you. Are these the only 3 ways? Surveys, focus groups, assessments? Does someone want to challenge us and toss in another idea?
Or if you have used one of these examples and successfully, or not, and lessons learned are always great too.
Okay.
Hi, I'll add really quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have experience with surveys and focus groups and yep, I think Elizabeth just mentioned like impact stories and just like general assessments. And I feel like what I've found is maybe just most helpful in consistency is just really being able to define impact, like define it based on your terms and communicate that to funders or even communicate that to just anyone who might want to partner with you, because I've learned that everyone has like a different definition. Like some people are looking for how many people you reach and others are looking for how unique your services are and how deep they go. So yeah, I've just found defining it based on your own terms and communicating that clearly, it helps to kind of, avoid assumptions and confusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Because it's for some organizations, the quantity of number of people is not really what they're looking to do. It might be deeper intervention with fewer people. So I think that's a really great point.
And I think too, to your point as well, that if there's limitations to in gathering data, to communicate that too, so that there aren't assumptions that the funder will know why you're not able to pull together. It's on your terms again. So to indicate that.
And I see there's some other good. Yeah, ideas coming through the chat. Health records.
Activity
logs. Yeah, I think it's always great to have others give you ideas too, because we can get sort of stuck in our day-to-day, and it can be hard to kind of expand and think about other ways to access potential ways to measure your program.
Yeah. There's some creative ways out there now. And so it might be something that you can even Google search or get some ideas, but very important to have that baseline, just initial, when we first see a client for mental health services, when they first walk in the door, is it a thumbs up, a so-so, and not so good, and capturing that somehow. And then in 3 months, how are they feeling? What's the general, change? So, and then it's not always going to be in the right direction. And funders are okay with that, by the way. I want to make that clear. Funders are okay if it's not in the direction that you had promised and you committed to. What they want to know is that you're attuned to it and that you are able to make some changes into your program service delivery that might improve it. And it might be partnering with others, whatever it may be. So being candid is helpful. It means that you're on top of it. All organizations face that, right? So they all have to figure out, wow, this isn't going how we thought. Let's make a little bit of a change here. So I'll move on. We've just got a couple more slides. We're going to move into the budget and then we'll open it up to questions. Yeah. We're doing great with time. So, okay.
Great. Budget is another area. I know a lot of organizations are challenged with how to build that best budget. And I think, again, this is an area that's challenging because some funders have a specific budget template that they want you to use, and it might look very different than how you usually build your budget. So trying to fit it into their template. Some funders, you can just submit your budget in whatever form they use or you use. So I think there's a lot of variation, just like with all aspects of grant writing. Generally, with the revenue side, that's where you're showing the amount that you need to raise to run your program. So what your fundraising goal is. Some funders will want to know they want to see in that budget template how much you're requesting from them as sort of a separate line item. Not all, but some of them do. And then what are the other sources of funding? So foundations, corporations, individual giving, government, they like to generally, most budget templates will have a breakdown of what are the different sources of funding that you're planning on to reach your budget goal. And then some funders will want to know what are other pending requests that you have from other funding sources. And sometimes they'll want to know what's committed and what's actually pending or what's planned. If you have a plan to submit grants to a funder and you haven't done it yet, but it's part of your fund development plan, and then what's been secured to date. The expense side, that's where you include all the different expenses and costs to support your program. Personnel is usually its own line item or section where you can list how many full-time, part-time staff, benefits, and and wages and all of that. And then other common non-personnel expenses would be program supplies, training and professional development for your staff. You might have, if you're serving, I work with a lot of youth programs, so maybe, meals for youth or transportation for field trips or all the different non-personnel expenses. And then for program budgets, you can include an indirect or administrative cost line item, which is usually 10 to 15%. Some funders set a specific rate, and maybe Leslie might have more to say about this, but I know some organizations, this can be kind of a confusing thing to figure out what the indirect cost is, but that's for a program budget to support all those things that it takes to run your organization. So all the administrative functions that are happening is kind of included in that 15% that doesn't need to be spelled out. It's just sort of grouped in there.
Great. And I will add to that, given the interest in this area, we will provide a template as a resource that basically will have, that Danielle has put together that just sort of, you can picture it with sort of a column for that total revenue that you need and how much are you requesting from the funder, and then how much have you already requested. And so it should all add up and how many's been secured. And so we can share that with you too. So as a guide. Great. And the verdant indirect cost rate is 8%, a flat 8% for this cycle. So, and then this is a favorite question that comes up, right, Danielle?
Yes, yes.
Your favorite to write.
The big sustainability question. What is your future funding plan? How will you sustain your organization? That's, the $1 million question that we all want the answer to. But a lot of funders, they do want to see that you have put some thought into this. And I think about this question, not so much that you need to have necessarily know, 5 years from now, how is your organization going to be funded, but that you've put some thought into how are you going to sustain the work that you're doing? Are you building relationships with funders to support your organization for the long term? Are you, doing some prospect research? So it's not just responding to grant opportunities as they come up, but you're starting to think about, what are different ways that we can reach our fundraising goals? Are you looking at how you could involve your board or volunteers more in fundraising and providing some examples of what that looks like? For example, is the board, maybe the leadership of the organization is working with the board to identify some potential individuals or businesses that could support your organization. So even if you don't have things yet concrete that are happening or funding actually coming in, what are some of the ways that you're looking at future funding to support your organization? And I think, diversifying funding is always an important thing to be looking at and exploring how to do that. So if you're mostly grant funded, how can you start to think about approaching individuals, or, are there other funding sources that you can explore to support your organization? So this is really just touching on, what is your organization doing to start thinking about those things?
And Danielle, I'll suggest that we just, we kind of go through, we just mention this and share that we all know that there's additional documents that funders always ask for, and that is the kitchen sink. That can vary. Everything's in there. And some funders are saying if it's publicly available, that's great. And so I think I want us to be able to fast forward so we can address some questions. Yeah. And so that brings us to the end here. And we will have several, slides of grant writing tips, including like 20 key tips that we'll be sharing with you, but we wanted to be able to go over this bread and butter elements with you. So let's open it up. We'd love to hear from you. Raise your hand. We have some questions in the chat. I've got Casey helping us here. So great. I'll stop sharing. Sure. Casey's got some questions she's going to ask us. And then
from Laura, what are the most common gaps in grant applications that cause delays in approvals?
Most common gaps. Okay. Yeah.
Well, maybe so it delays in approval. Just so I understand the question, gaps that would make a grant not as competitive in being approved, or from the funder side of the process of approval? I'm not sure which of those.
Laura, I wonder if she's still on to clarify.
Oh, okay. Common mistakes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, you can go ahead, Leslie.
Well, yeah, I would say that there's a couple different things. Some funders will work with you back and forth, right? So there's this sort of proposal kind of collaborative effort, and that can really delay because they keep going through iterations and there's questions. And so that's a different, let's say though, there's a defined, deadline though. And if they then come back and say, well, we need to look at a few more things, what are some common gaps that we'll see? Incomplete applications, that maybe something hasn't been fully fleshed out, or it hasn't been uploaded, or something hasn't been, a question hasn't been answered. There's also, often it's something that's incomplete, or it may be nuances like the budget, some amounts in the budget aren't adding up and it doesn't connect, or some narrative is describing activities that the budget is not addressing. And so that budget tells your story, and that needs to be the same story as your proposal narrative. And so sometimes that might not be lining up. So I'll turn to you, Danielle, if you want to add anything to that. I'm going to go to the next question. We probably have time for 5 or 6 questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, the tips have some different pointers as well around what makes a strong grant application. I think really being mindful to respond to the question. Sometimes people are copying and pasting and not necessarily looking at what is the funder most interested in. And even though we talked about, these are the core elements of a grant, each funder is also different in what they're most interested in hearing about. So just making sure you're speaking to the funder's interests. And some funders will provide kind of a scoring or reviewer rubric. And if you can kind of cross-check with that to see, am I answering the areas that they're going to be most interested in looking at in the scoring rubric? That's a great way to cross-check as well.
Yeah. I do with my 14-year-old. If you did your assignment, can you go back and look at the rubric, and did you meet all the requirements?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, moving on to the next one. Yes, well, we'll take some hands now. Yes, and then we'll go back. We'll go back to the chat.
Good morning. This is Momodu from West African Center in Washington. I have a question. The need statement is very important in writing the project proposal, because that's where you really need to present a very compelling case for your funding. But a lot of these proposals have very strict word counts, and sometimes you cannot write all you need in that in that area.
Yes.
As a result, we miss a lot of important things like community statements and audios and visuals and all that kind of stuff. So what is your advice? How do we customize this to make sure that all the very important elements are captured in the within the word count, which is very strict?
I'm sure Danielle has thoughts on this. Word limits, character limits, file limits, right? Yeah.
It is. It's very challenging. I think whenever a funder has additional information, question where you can provide additional information, you can sometimes put some of it in there if there's things that you feel are really important to include, or if you have some kind of a annual report or something that can also show the impact of your organization or what you do as a separate document that you can upload. So if there's other ways to bring some of it in. And I think as Leslie was kind of talking earlier about having someone who's not very familiar with your work review the application. If you can have someone look, because I usually I put kind of everything down that's important, and then it's sort of shortening and editing down. And sometimes it's helpful to have an outside person look at it and help, point out what they think is the most compelling or what they think is the most important. And then you can sort of take out some of the stuff that you think is important, but maybe it's, at the end of the day, you have to prioritize within all the stuff that you can write down. You have to prioritize what's the most important to convey. So, and I think, a lot of, and Leslie can speak more to this, but funders are reviewing, tons and tons and tons of applications. And so they're just quickly reviewing. So I know it feels so important to convey all of this information, but they just need to see like the snippets of why is what you're doing so important? Like, what is the top reason or top 2 reasons because even if you write a lot of stuff, they might not even read it all. They might just kind of be going through kind of those key points.
Yeah, thank you. That was good.
I wanted to get to a question that someone's asked here too in the chat about basically, you know, they're running a sustainable, good, strong program, looking to grow. I can't find it now, but I'm hoping I capture this, but they're looking to grow and interested in, like, you know, startup, and that's going to involve an investment in people to do that. So I hope I've captured that. And so one thing that we would want to share, I mean, honestly, if we could do a day of this, I've taken a 3-day grant writing. So you can spend a lot of time here, but there's different types of grants. And so there's capacity building grants, there's pilot, there's demonstration grants, there's, yeah, like I said, pilot would be a great opportunity. So there are some funders that have designated funds or small grants, micro grants. And so you'll ideally want to see if you can find those. It's a little bit of a needle in a haystack sometimes because everyone words them a little bit differently. Some might call it seed, but some might call it incubator grants. And so it can vary, but those funders will be, that might be a really great connection. And again, you can start with your community foundation in the area and ask them if they can point you to a direction of funders, either family or corporate, that might be interested in an expansion or growth of a program where you already have a lot of success and you're looking to build it out or add something new. But you're right, oftentimes it's hard just to get that funding for the, the staff on board. So Danielle, feel free to jump into that. Or...
Yeah, I think some of that prospect research, that's where that can come in helpful, because some of those funder databases, you can select those different types of grants. So you want to search for capacity building or for capital or whatever the type of grant is, and you can do a search by that category. So that can be helpful to spend if you're really needing to find some potential funding opportunities to invest in maybe a month of a funder database to do that.
Yeah. Other questions from folks? Hand raising, anything?
I had a quick question. Thank you for answering the sustainability and building staff, but I do have a question. We have donated in-kind donations. How do funders, so we have locations that are actually donated locations. We wouldn't be able to function if we didn't have those donated locations. What's the best way to represent that? Because that is that's a huge donation. So how do you represent it the best when the people don't care about a tax statement? They just say, here, have the space. And we say, well, please give us an amount, that it would cost so we can list it. And they're just like, here nor there about it. Like, we don't need that. We don't care.
Sure. Yeah.
So how do you face that the best? Just say, please do.
Is your question,
taxes go?
How do you reflect that? You're saying, how do you reflect it in the proposal?
How do you reflect it?
I'll just give a quick answer, and Danielle, I'd love to hear from you too. But I do think take opportunity of the budget narrative, or if there's not like a line item for that. I have seen some funders have a line item for in-kind, but you don't see it as much anymore. So it's nice that you have that. That's great. And then you can really explain it also in your sustainability section. You can explain it there. Danielle, I'll turn to you. You're expert on this. So
well, I mean, pretty similar to what you said. Sometimes if you can create your own program budget or organization budget and include in-kind as a line item and estimate the amount that you're, I know that can be challenging sometimes if they're not sharing, this is worth this much, but you can try to kind of estimate how much that would be and include that in the revenue side of your, one of the sources of revenue as in-kind. And then, like Leslie said, just explaining it in the budget narrative and what is that in-kind, what's being donated, what is that supporting? Because that is a really valuable source of support for the organization.
Yes, it's extremely valuable. And I think it might be standing in our way of growing, is having those spaces already. It's kind of like a blank where in our budget where at the current time. So I appreciate you.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, I think one organization I work with, they get in-kind space and they just kind of estimate the value and then they count it in the occupancy rent so that there's a balanced income and expense. So the in-kind might be like 10,000, and then they'll put that into the occupancy rent line item so that the income and expense are balanced.
Okay. Okay. Our expenses and incomes would not be balanced if we had to pay rent. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's where we can show more need.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I just indicated that we could probably, if it's okay with you, Danielle, stay on for a couple of minutes there and answer questions. And so I can start with this one from Wally Webster about elaborating on recommendations for startup organizations seeking funding for the first time. You know, I don't know if this is the right analogy, but I think of someone that's like starting, you know, a new job or a new career. I would say, you know, like go and have informational interviews, talk with, you know, some folks to sort of see how you can get your foot in the door, but you don't want to go to the big, you know, the big wigs or in your career and say, I'm ready to be a director of something, you know? So I think it's good to build those relationships, as Danielle shared before, with different funders, and it's more informational. And so we have folks that have come to us too to say, can we sit down and share a little bit about who we are? It doesn't need to be too much of a song and dance, if you will, but just say, this is what we're trying to do. And do you have some suggestions of how we can get started? And so you know, that would be one approach. And then Danielle, I'll turn to you. I'm sure you have some ideas around that.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. And I think generally you don't see a ton of foundations or grant funded focus on startup for whatever reason. That doesn't seem to be super appealing. I mean, sometimes, but I think if you can explore other ways to kind of get that seed money, whether it's through a partnership or if, I don't know if it's its own 501c3 or if you're fiscally sponsored and can somehow work with your fiscal sponsor, but if you can kind of get things going a little bit, and then I think foundations tend to be more interested in investing, but often they want to see kind of what you're able to do. They want to know that you can do the things you say you're going to do. So I think it's a little bit harder, but you can find those foundations and funders that are interested in startup as kind of an area that they support. But yeah.
If you want to take this opportunity as well, we have Commissioner Knudsen on our call today, and so glad that she can join us. And I'm not sure if you'd like to say anything, but just wanted to acknowledge that we have one of our 5 commissioners on our call too and listening as well.
Yes, I just want to say thank you for everybody. This has been great listening to all of the questions and all of the answers about this. So I've been learning a lot. So thank you very much.
Great. Great. And then we can take 2 more calls. So we've got 2 more questions. I'm sorry, from Mamadou. Is that right? Yes.
So let's see here. Yeah, I'm looking at a lot of the proposals that I go through. They are kind of restricted funding, and they will not pay for or take care of operating or overhead costs. And I'm wondering, if we are to get the funding to implement a project, who is going to do it? The people that's going to implement the project. I think it's also good to consider how we take care of them in terms of paying for operation, paying for overhead. So, and this is super important because we need that money to get going. These are also what we need to do. So, what is your advice in this area?
Yeah, what to do when grants are restricted funding with very limited sources, very limited allocation, right, to administrative or operating costs. Yeah. And now a favorite, right?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's one that I don't know any organization that doesn't struggle with that question. I think two things come to mind. Going back again to the funder research and prospect research, there are funders out there that support general operating. And if you can kind of build that into your pipeline to start applying to more of those funders and kind of have more of those unrestricted funds to then cover some of those expenses that, you know, all the different things that are needed to run an organization. When you have those restricted funds that can only go to specific things, you have that hopefully reserve of general operating or unrestricted to support the full cost of running the organization. So I know it's challenging, and I think that's a big kind of topic in the world of philanthropy and nonprofits of how to move more towards funding general operating among the funder community. So So I think, that's one piece. And then I think the other piece is, and sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought. So the funder research, Leslie, if you want to jump in and maybe it'll come back to me.
Yeah, no, I think it is challenging. And then it is really looking for some other, that's where the diversified funding helps so much. It's really important to have that diversified funding, because you are going to find some funders will only support, A, and other funders will only support B. And so it's best if you can diversify that as much as possible. So
yeah, that was the thought that I had exactly, was to, if you can have, what's great about individual donors is it's usually unrestricted. You can use it where it's needed most. And so I think a lot of organizations that are smaller may start out grant funded and then realize we really need to build out an individual donor program because we need that unrestricted funding, we need flexibility. So yeah.
And look outside the region as well there might be some general operating support, some funders that are, interested in your specific issue area. And so they really want to support that, even if they are in a different region. I think we're at a good point to wrap up here. I wanted to let folks know too that we'll send out like a 3-question survey, very quick, just more for our learning. So please be constructive and candid in your feedback about, maybe if anything wasn't addressed, let us know, and we can continue to be able to put more information out there for you. And again, we'll be having our Q&A for the Verdant grant application process this Wednesday, tomorrow, following our board meeting in the morning. And stay tuned. I encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter for the Verdant Health Commission so you can find out about other classes and workshops. And I thank my lead presenter, Danielle, so much for all of this great content. And the behind the scenes, Casey is helping us in managing all the chat. And especially to all of you for participating. Thank you so much. We really, I'm glad that you could spend your hour and a half this morning with us, with a cup of coffee, I hope. So I think that's it. Thank you all. And you will find this recording at the end of the week on our website. And feel free to come off mute and say hi or anything. Yep. Hello.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really helpful information.
Great. Good to hear. And Tracy, I saw you just finished a course, so I bet you could chime in with a few things too, right? Yes.
Yeah, this was kind of like a short course version of the grant writing certificate program that I just completed. So it was really nice to have kind of a refresher on some of the things that still aren't maybe 100% clear for me.
Right. Much of it comes in practice, you'll find, right? So just doing it. Yeah. Excellent.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you all. Have a fine day. Bye-bye.